Welcome to the Full Moon TV Buff, episode T9c. This episode will review the episode synopsis and discuss the season arcs from the first 3 seasons of Being Human, which ran from 2009 through 2011, since I wanted to cover the entirety of George and Mitchell's stories. I watched this on Amazon Prime and Fandor. I did watch this when it first came out. There is a single long episode that covers everything in one single package. So now we're going to cover the episodes. Season 1, Episode 1, Flotsam and Jetsam. This pilot wastes little time establishing the basic premise. Vampire Mitchell and werewolf George rent a house together and try to live normal lives. Ghost Annie died in that house, and her spirit cannot easily leave, so she becomes the third roommate. Mitchell recently fell off the wagon in his attempts to remain abstinent from blood. As a result, he created a new vampire, Lauren, who wants to punish Mitchell. George struggles to protect humanity from his monthly transformation into an uncontrollable monster. Episode 2, Tully. This episode opens with a chilling description of George's lycanthropic transformation. Another werewolf with questionable motives named Tully mentors George. While it starts out good, Tully is ultimately a predatory monster in human form as well. So werewolves and vampires are assholes as a general rule, and both George and Mitchell must fight their dark natures. Tully created George and is desperate for the social support that George has. Episode 3, Ghost Town. Mitchell introduces Annie to a ghost named Gilbert, who helps her understand her capabilities and limitations. She's stuck because something about her life or death needs resolving. Meanwhile, George starts dating a coworker named Nina. Lauren is spiraling and Mitchell agrees to help her. Annie's fiance, Owen, who's also the boy's landlord, finally sorts out the plumbing situation, revealing he killed Annie in the process. Lauren returns to Herrick and the other vampires. Episode 4, Another Fine Mess. Things kick into high gear. Annie reacts to learning her fiancé killed her by manifesting poltergeist powers. Mitchell befriends a young boy, Bernie. A DVD mix-up sees Mitchell send home a vampire porn snuff film with Bernie instead of a Laurel and Hardy movie. Now the neighborhood thinks Mitchell is a pedophile. Mitchell and George face a focused campaign to drive them out. Owen plans to evict the boys and move in himself. George obsesses over his new relationship, but the scandal convinces him that he should dump Nina before she learns the truth about him. Everything escalates until Bernie is hit in a car accident. Mitchell offers Bernie's mom the choice. Let her son die or let Mitchell turn him into a vampire. She chooses the latter. Mitchell ends the episode by rejoining the vampires. Annie decides to become an angel of vengeance and justice. Only George remains committed to being human. Episode 5, Where the Wild Things Are. George summons Owen to the flat where Annie springs her trap. It doesn't have the impact that she was hoping for since he's a real sociopath. Annie warns Owen's new girlfriend, but he manipulates both women. Herrick and the other vampires welcome Mitchell back with open arms. Mitchell runs into Josie, a mortal woman that he dated back in the 60s. Mitchell offers to save her life by making her a vampire. She's dying of lung cancer. Mitchell uncovers the vampire's feeding stock. Herrick plans to kill Mitchell when George and Annie try to rescue him. They don't do very well, but Lauren saves the day, staking Seth and providing an escape route. Then she begs Mitchell to kill her. She can't live the life of a vampire. Annie, now with the boys as scary supernatural support, confronts Owen again, whispering a secret so terrifying it drives him mad. This accomplished, her door to the afterlife appears. There is a tearful goodbye before Herrick interrupts the proceedings by staking Mitchell and throwing everything into chaos. Episode 6, Bad Moon Rising. Mitchell met George when Mitchell saved him from a vampire beating. George gets Mitchell to the hospital. Annie won't enter her door while Mitchell hangs in the balance, and it closes. Josie willingly gives her blood to Mitchell to allow him to recover. Herrick threatens George. Mitchell offers himself to Herrick in exchange for George and Annie being left alone. Of course, Herrick plans to double-cross them. Yes, Annie takes the showdown as an opportunity to free the vampire's feeding stock. George pretends to go along with Mitchell's self-sacrifice, but he's got his own plan. He misdirects Herrick to another location where he locks Herrick in with himself. And tonight is a full moon. Unfortunately, Nina observes this, learns George's little secret, and gets scratched in the process. Oh, and there's a stinger introducing a scientist to his next season's antagonist. Season 2, Episode 1, Cure and Contagion. The vampires of Bristol make George's life miserable as payback for Herrick. Ivan and his girlfriend Daisy take a run at him. Nina tells Annie that she's been scratched, and Mitchell's vampiric senses let him know something's up. Annie gets a job as a pub server. Kemp has a werewolf he keeps in a pressure chamber. He experiments on the poor soul, killing him in the process. While Nina and George both go through the change separately, Annie watches over Nina, George wakes up snuggled next to the half-eaten stag carcass. Daisy seduces George in the forest. George and Nina have an emotional fight that ends when Nina reveals that she is now a werewolf. Daisy visits her daughter, who's dying of old age and is her last tie to humanity. Kemp's team gets access to the gang's house and puts them under surveillance. Episode 2, Serve God, Love Me, and Mend. Annie obsesses over this guy, Saul, that she met at work. Something uses the TV to convince Saul to tell Annie about his disturbing near-death experience, which closely mirrors her own. It then urges him to sexually assault her. Some powerful forces in the afterlife are pissed that Annie did not pass over. In the end, she realizes nice guy Hugh is better for her. Saul dies in a car crash, and he almost drags Annie through his door. In the end, he can't do it, but Annie is invisible again. Lucy gets a vampire victim at the morgue whom Mitchell recognizes. Mitchell reunites with Carl, the vampire who taught him to live without consuming blood, which rattles Mitchell. If Carl fell off the wagon, can any vampire really quit drinking blood? Mitchell and George cover for Carl, which disgusts Nina. Nina resorts to gallows humor to cope, which George isn't a big fan of. Kemp turns out to be a religious fanatic. In the end, Nina can't handle the supernatural world and leaves George with a note. Episode 3, Long Live the King. George reacts to Nina's leaving with depression. Annie wants to help Hugh get back with his ex as a project and ropes George into helping. The leaderless vampires get careless in their killing. Mitchell assumes leadership of the Bristol vampires to maintain some kind of order and reinstates the previous system to clean up messes. To prevent the short-term exposure and fallout, he covers up killings. The medical examiner reminds Mitchell that ends don't justify means. Mitchell and Lucy finally go on a date. Mitchell gets violent with the vampires to establish dominance. This is not going to end well. George accidentally destroys Kemp's bug. Nina calls to properly break up with George a second time. In a 1-2 punch, we learn Kemp has Nina in his power, and he's working with Lucy, so she knows about Mitchell. Episode 4, Educating Creature. Lucy posited a theory on an evil gene. She convinces the organization not to kill Nina in the pressure chamber. George cages and tranquilizes his wolf in an attempt to live a normal, better life. He gets a job as a language instructor. He speaks 6 languages and has a genius-level IQ. It starts, well, with the wolf sleeping the entire full moon away, but it doesn't stay good. The wolf forces his way out in turrets and rage, leading to George beating his boss half to death. A World War II-era ghost named Sykes saves Annie from getting dragged into the afterlife. He teaches her how to read auras, control electronics, and fight off the other side. Meanwhile, Mitchell starts Blood Addicts Anonymous. It immediately starts going poorly. Episode 5, The Looking Glass. We get a taste of Mitchell's life before he met Josie. She awakened his conscience. He sets up dinner with Lucy, unaware of her connection to Kemp. Lucy and Kemp argue about whether their purpose is to study evil or combat it. The chief constable tries to force Mitchell to kill for him, which knocks Mitchell off the wagon again. He confesses to Lucy, who mirrors his relationship with Josie. George starts dating Sam, a colleague from work. Annie gets roped into babysitting a ghost baby, interesting concept, which starts George spiraling as he thinks about the life that he planned for and has lost. He accelerates his rebound relationship in an unhealthy manner. Episode 6, In the Morning. Kemp was an Anglican priest whose wife and daughter were killed by vampires, so he's honestly earned his hatred of vampires. Annie panics at the very idea of George moving in with Sam. George's lycanthropic condition almost immediately disrupts his new relationship. Surprise. Annie spends the episode getting a washed-up stage psychic, Alan Cortez, back to helping ghosts. Annie gets closure with her mom. Lucy struggles with her faith in Kemp's mission, but ultimately provides intelligence to Kemp, allowing for a major strike. A bomb takes out the funeral home where the vampires gather. Episode 7, Damage. Nina re-enters George's life with big news. She's working with Kemp and offers George a shot at a cure. George is having none of that. Annie believes Kemp can help her move on, but he fails to exorcise her. Mitchell and Daisy are the only survivors of the bomb. Daisy vows vengeance just as soon as she figures out who did it. They start with the coroner, who points them to Lucy, which pushes Mitchell to the same anger level as Daisy. Mitchell falls off the wagon hard. He and Daisy massacre a subway car of people. Evil Mitchell is a psycho. George proposes to Sam and tries to attend a parent-teacher conference, only for confusion over daylight savings time to mean the wolf almost comes out at an elementary school. George traumatizes Sam's daughter for life. That relationship is over. George turns to Lucy and Kemp for the cure. Episode 8, All God's Children. The show goes full horror movie as Mitchell assaults Kemp's facility. Most of Kemp's men die. Kemp even kills one himself to get a door to open so that he can send Annie to the other side. This snaps Mitchell, George, and Nina out of their states and gets them to flee to safety, finally. Lucy tracks them down to try and apologize, but Kemp follows her and kills her for losing faith in his mission. Kemp holds Nina hostage when a door appears for Lucy, except Annie comes through it and drags Kemp back with her. And then Annie appears on a broken television set to tell Mitchell and George she's trapped. The boys vow to rescue her. The season ends with Daisy reviving Herrick. Season 3, Episode 1. Leah, Mitchell, George, and Nina move into a bed and breakfast on Berry Island in Wales. Mitchell hitches a trip through a death's door with a cancer patient to rescue Annie from purgatory. A ghost named Leah takes him on a hit list of his vampiric past sins. She gets him to accept that he's a monster by forcing him to acknowledge just how many people he's killed. She tells him that he will die soon, killed by a wolf-shaped bullet. George runs into another young werewolf while he's preparing for the full moon. George pursues the young werewolf and gets tangled up with some doggers and gets arrested. Nina bails him out just in time. They take refuge in an abandoned church for the monthly transformation and end up engaging in a little werewolf sex. A bunch of vampiric thugs throw an older werewolf into a cage with an innocent man. They arm the man with a knife and then bet on who will win. The wolf is victorious. The two werewolves are father and son. Annie is released and is promised heaven next time she passes through the door. Episode 2, Adam's Family. George and Nina discover a 46-year-old vampire trapped in a teenager's body, feeding on his nearly dead father at the hospital. His name is Adam, and his last parent is dying. They've taken care of him his entire undead existence, which means he's never killed. Meanwhile, a representative of the old ones, ancient, powerful vampires, contacts Mitchell. They fear that his actions in the subway will out all vampires. The old ones' servants accept Adam as their vampiric child, but they are just as depraved as most. All vampires are. In the end, Adam sets out to follow in Mitchell's footsteps and learn to take care of himself. While he passes his first morality test, I am skeptical he'll stay on the straight and narrow based on the behavior of literally every other vampire on the show. Episode 3, Type 4. Mitchell finally realizes that Annie fancies him. While on a midnight walk observing humanity, Annie draws the attention of Sasha, the first zombie we've met on the show. She's rotting and clearly in denial about her condition. Turns out there were 3 other zombies, but scientists vivisected them before incinerating them. They felt pain the entire time. All 4 died about the same time Annie escaped purgatory, so there's some relationship there. Sasha returns to her rugby-playing boyfriend, but he does not respond well. On a girls' night at the club, Sasha begins literally falling apart. Her door comes soon. Meanwhile, Nina is pregnant. She planned to get an abortion and not tell George, which causes some friction when George finds out. Sasha's death inspires Nina to have the baby. Lastly, Mitchell deals with an obsessive vampiric stalker fan. A real single white vampire kind of situation. Mitchell ends up staking him. Episode 4, The Pack. Nina and George try to keep news of the baby a secret while they learn about lycanthropic pregnancy. They find Tom and his dad Anthony from the season premiere. Tom wants to help, but Anthony insists they stay out of it. Anthony and Mitchell keep their burgeoning relationship secret as well. Mitchell has arousal issues, which Annie desperately tries to help with, even suggesting that he pull a one-night stand and she experience the sex through her ghostly powers. That goes spectacularly poorly. Tom tries helping George and Nina, and Anthony finally reveals his story. Unfortunately for everyone, it's a lie. Tom wasn't born a werewolf. His mother wasn't killed by vampires. Anthony killed Tom's parents when he was a baby and turned him into a werewolf. Anthony did raise Tom as his son. Mitchell tries to drive Anthony and Tom off by pointing the vampiric dogfight ring at them. However, Nina and George get scooped up with Tom. Anthony, Mitchell, and Annie stage a rescue. Episode 5, The Longest Day. A sonogram confirms Nina remains pregnant after the monthly transformation. Just when we forgot Herrick, George discovers him in the hospital psych ward. He doesn't know what he is. In the interest of protecting the supernatural world from being exposed, Nina and George take Herrick home. Now, Mitchell insists that they kill him again immediately. He's almost excited about it. George initially agrees, kind of reluctantly, but Nina and Annie only see a vulnerable man who can't remember his past. A social worker shows up to vet releasing Herrick into their custody. Nina bullies the poor, frazzled, overworked social worker to clear up the situation. Nina confronts Mitchell over his bloodlust towards Herrick. Mitchell believes Nina is the wolf-shaped bullet that is going to kill him. George finds the guts to stand up to Mitchell. Herrick finds Mitchell's Box Tunnel 20 scrapbook. He shows Nina, who puts all the pieces together. She anonymously reports Mitchell to the police. Herrick has unknowingly driven a wedge between our four heroes. Episode 6, Daddy Ghoul. The guilt of the Box Tunnel 20 massacre sends Mitchell further into a spiral. Detective Inspector Nancy Reed shows up to interview him, but it's pretty clear that the police think this is a dead-end lead. Nina at least can see how dangerous Mitchell and Herrick are becoming. Annie, thinking that she's helping Mitchell, vows to solve the case. Herrick gives Nancy Mitchell's scrapbook. Now, Mitchell gets it back, but draws her undivided attention in the process. George learns his father passed away and sets off to get closure at the funeral. He gets more than he hoped for when he finds that his father is a ghost. His mom left his dad. George is a chip off the old block. George helps his father finish his earthly business, which ends up being him visiting his mother, so George Sr. can pass on. George's mom, Ruth, has hooked up with George's PE teacher. She doesn't take his return as well as her ex-husband did. Only, it turns out George Sr. isn't really dead. He faked his death. George and Nina help him win Ruth back. He tells his parents he's a werewolf, but they just are not ready to hear this. Episode 7, Though the Heavens Fall. It turns out Herrick is responsible for Anthony becoming a werewolf. Anthony was the human victim in a vampire's werewolf cage fight and managed to survive the night and kill the werewolf. But he took a scratch and entered the supernatural world. He and Tom return to recuperate after a clash with vampires. At least, that's the story. Anthony has tracked down Herrick and craves revenge. This time, facing a werewolf, however, Herrick has a knife and emerges victorious. Nancy, with the unwitting help of Annie, zeroes in on Mitchell as the Box Tunnel 20 killer. Just as Annie confronts the reality that Mitchell is the killer, Nancy's boss reveals himself as a vampire who's been covering up the whole thing while looking for another suspect to pin everything on. Annie stakes him and then convinces Mitchell to give himself up when the SWAT team, or whatever they call it in Wales, shows up. After Mitchell is hauled away, Herrick succumbs to his hunger and kills Nancy and a whole lot of other cops. Drinking blood restores his memory and he wants revenge on George. He starts by snapping Nina's neck. Finally, now in police custody, Mitchell is exposed as a vampire. Episode 8, The Wolf-Shaped Bullet. Herrick cannot let that happen, so he kills an entire police precinct, destroys all evidence of Mitchell, and breaks them out. Nina is rushed to the emergency room. Annie hitches a trip through a dead cop's door to visit Leah in purgatory. Leah reveals that all of this is so she can serve up judgment on Mitchell. Tom buries his father and sets out to avenge him, even though Anthony specifically asked him not to in his final note. In order to test Mitchell's loyalties, Herrick locks George and Mitchell in the wolf fight cage. It's not the full moon, but when Herrick reveals how Mitchell's reckless actions led to Nina's death, George snaps. Tom shows up to stake Herrick. Mitchell neutralizes George, but George is done being Mitchell's friend. Annie convinces Leah that revenge just hurts more innocents while punishing the target. Leah lets Annie return and miraculously save Nina. Mitchell stakes Herrick. Someone named Edgar Wyndham cleans up the Box Tunnel 20 mess with a patsy. Mitchell shows up begging George to kill him. Mitchell is tired. He knows that he will kill again someday. The hunger always wins. The foursome act the hell out of this confrontation. In the end, Annie kisses Mitchell goodbye, and George agrees to mercy kill him. Wyndham shows up and reveals himself to be one of the old ones who are taking active control of the world. They want Mitchell as their attack dog. Instead, George sets Mitchell free by killing him and declares war on the old ones. Season's 1 arc focuses on establishing the trio's unusual household while Herrick and his vampires plot to conquer humanity. The season culminates in a confrontation between George and Herrick and forces each character to embrace aspects of their supernatural nature that they had been resisting. The primary threat is the supernatural world, dragging our heroes away from their humanity. Season 2 expands the mythology by introducing Kemp's scientific organization with a religious motivation that studies and seeks to cure supernatural beings. Humanity becomes a much more serious threat, pushing our core threesome away, while the supernatural community continues to attack as well. This season explores themes of prejudice, scientific ethics, and whether these beings can truly escape their natures. The season builds to a devastating finale where the boundaries between the supernatural and human worlds are threatened. Season 3's arc focuses on Annie and Mitchell's relationship, Nina's lycanthropic pregnancy, and Mitchell dealing with the fallout of the Box Tunnel 20 massacre. All of the stories revolve around family, healthy and unhealthy versions. Our heroes face their fiercest foes yet, each other. This season seems to definitively confirm that vampires are evil by nature. A wedge has been driven between vampires and werewolves and ghosts. So I guess in the end, Kemp was right. Just a bastard about it. So if you like lycanthropes, like, share, and subscribe. Contribute your thoughts and additional observations in the comments below. Let me know what I missed or what you noticed. Next, I plan on discussing the last 2 seasons of Being Human from 2012 and 2013. Keep your eye on the moon, a silver bullet in the chamber, and we'll see you back next episode.